Today I want to talk with you about something where I started from and where I am now, magic-wise. Bear in mind, this isn't like concrete. I'm just, for an analogy, I'm like a sea otter that's forgot to wrap itself up in seaweed when the tides come in, and I'm just going with the flow. I'm going wherever my magic path wants to take me. So this isn't concrete, just a disclaimer that this is what I'm doing now, basically, from what I used to do. But enough tangent, let's move on. So I started off probably where most people would start off. I found some books on witchcraft and stuff because I was always interested in the shiny sparkly crystals and the cool herbs and all that sort of thing. And I started where probably most of you started, where I looked at some of those books. I sat there and I was like, of course, silly naive teenager. And I was just like, you know what, I'm never going to know if this actually works and if this is actually real or not, unless I get one of these books I'm interested in and try it. So I actually ended up buying two, but I ended up getting, from Konstantinos, Nocturnal Witchcraft and Gothic Grimoire. Those were the first ever magic books that I started with, and I'm curious to see how many of you also started with those two books. Yeah, I got those and I started with those. Bear in mind, I was the sort of kid that was like, oh, magic is just whatever happens to be in the spirituality aisle of your local bookstore or whatever, when I first started, which led to some very interesting experiences, let's just say. I mean, don't get me wrong, Bastet and Anubis were great, but as cool as the Egyptian entities are, it's not really where I'm supposed to be, and they knew that. And then later on in my magical researches, don't get me wrong, Nocturnal Witchcraft and Gothic Grimoire were very cool. Back to those in a moment. I was doing a little bit of researching on the internet, and I came across, and I hope these are okay to share images of, these images, and I found some on dragons. I think the first one I specifically found was one for the Earth Dragon. I'll see if I can find it and I'll pop it up. If not, then unfortunately I'm just going to have to explain. It was kind of like there was a picture of an Earth Dragon, it had all this fantasy writing, and it had basically how you would call upon this dragon and how it would help you out in a way. And I found the other ones. I found water, I found fire, I found air, and I found Phoenix. I used the Phoenix one for spirit because, again, very sort of pagan and Wiccan, doing the elements and that. I never did... Sorry, I'm smacking things. I never did do any circle casting or salt on the altar or things like that, though. And I will explain why in a moment. Yeah, for a relatively brief, and I say relatively brief, I think it was about 4 weeks, I sort of was interested. I was like, oh, can you work with dragons and other fantasy creatures then in witchcraft and spell work? And it turns out, yes, there is another book on that. I can't remember who it's by. I want to say DJ Conway, same person that's Dancing with Dragons. But there's a book called Magical Mystical Creatures, and it goes into how you can use mythical creature symbolism in your spell work as well. I used that for a little while. Bestiary magic, I don't know what you would call it, but I was sort of doing both of them for a while. I worked with dragons. I didn't work exclusively with dragons. I did try working with griffins as well. Very cool, actually. Griffins are very cool to use in spell work. I worked with sea serpents for a little bit, and that will come back later. But yeah, on to why I sort of stopped. Don't worry, I've still got Nocturnal Witchcraft and Gothic Grimoire for nostalgia's sake, and there's still stuff in there I would probably still use to this day, just a little edited. And the reason I say that is because the one thing I really didn't necessarily, well, two things in a sense, that I didn't necessarily get on with very well in these sort of there was a lot of fluffiness to it. I didn't really understand why you had, I didn't understand why you had to call on certain entities that you probably never work with pantheons you probably didn't really care about. Sorry, Greek pantheon. I never understood that part. I never understood why you had to cast a circle, which is interesting because Solomonic magic as well, like you force the, like traditional Solomonic magic, you force the entities into a triangle. I never understood that either, and I don't use that system. But I never got on with, and no offense, but I never got on with the words "so mote it be." Something about those, I know it's basically saying "so be it, it is done" or whatever, but for some reason I just never got on with it. And I never really got on with the, as much as I love poetry, I never got on with the rhyming scheme of spells as well. For some reason that just, again, I don't know if it's just me, but spells that rhyme, yes, I know they're easier to remember. And, you know, you don't have to refer to an old dusty book or a big giant grimoire that you've written all your spells in. It's easier to remember, so you can take it with you, and you can be like, so might it be. But I never really got on with that, and for some reason, rhyming spells just bother me. I don't know why. I don't know if anyone else is like that. I don't know if it's a me thing. But yeah, I never really got on with them, so I did some more research, I looked in some other places, I went back to Constantinos, and, oh, excuse me, this is where the interesting bit, well, it's all interesting, but this is where the interesting bit comes in for some of you. I found a book called Vampires: The Occult Truth by the same author. As you probably know from the channel name, things happened, and obviously that's sort of like my kickstart, boot down a pit, venture down the rabbit hole, whichever analogy you want to use, into vampirism. So yeah, that was fun. I did find some other books that people recommended as well, like the Psychic Vampire Codex and things like that. I do have if you haven't watched it already, shameless promotion, I know, but I do have a video on books on vampiric magic and stuff like that, and like why I like them and why you might like them but I don't like them and things like that. Try and remember to put it in the annotations for you. But yeah, anyway, moving on. I read some other books on vampirism, some good, some bad, some ugly. But that's the thing with vampire magic, some of it sticks with you, some of it doesn't stick with you. You might like things that I don't like. There's some, not so much now, but like earlier in the vampire community, there were some like book writings which were kind of like, I don't know if you've heard the phrase better than thou, which is basically like my way is superior, every other person's way is rubbish. But there was like a little bit of like that kind of gatekeeping in the early community. I don't know if it's still around. I don't really like sort of like on the outskirts or a Ronin, as some people, you know, that's the term they use for people that are in the community, but they don't really do like the meetings and so. Anyway, moving on before I rant too much about the VC. There's a good video on that as well. Not on my channel, but you know. Yeah, I found some books. Some were good, some were not so good. Like I said, everyone's different. You might like what I don't like. But yeah, that took me sort of down a rabbit hole in and of itself in a way. And I started getting interested in what I called at the time spiritual vampirism. Because I didn't know that vampire magic was the actual word for it, but same difference, I suppose. In my research, I did spiral off a little bit, and I don't consider myself part of these, but I just want to bring it up because it came up in my research on the internet at the time. Like Ethereans, Otherkin, even Starseeds came up, and I'm not going to argue about it. I'm not it, but if you're it, whatever. Don't, you know, whatever makes you happy at the end of the day, or whatever helps you cope. Because life is the longest thing that you'll ever experience, but it's still too short to be arguing about whether you're secretly an alien from the Arcturan system come to Earth to help people heal, or whether you secretly think that you have the soul of a dragon but the skin of a human. Life's too short to argue about that. I'm not for you, I'm not against you, I simply exist. Whatever makes you happy. From a vampire. Off on a tangent real quickly about that. You can skip this if you want to, if you know this isn't your thing. Like I said, not for, not against, I simply exist. But I feel like there's some confusion about what the words stand for now, because back when I was doing my research, otherkin just basically meant someone who doesn't necessarily identify with because of past lives, or they just think that their soul's not completely human because reincarnation or whatever means. But it used to mean, when I was doing my research, it basically meant someone who doesn't identify with, for whatever reason, as being entirely human. But now it seems like people are confusing the definition, and they're like, oh, you have to believe you're a mythical creature of some kind, and or a mythical aligning, a wolf that can use magic and things like that. And I feel like the terms are getting confused, but there's also a term going around which I kind of prefer, but again, I'm not really sure if I fall under it, but there's alterhuman that's going around, and I feel like that's a broader sort of like umbrella term that has all these things under it. Not everyone's into it, some people don't like them for whatever reason, and I can kind of understand. I'm not saying like I'm for or against, like I said, I'm completely neutral ground. I'm try to be as friendly to as many decent communities as possible, and if you're not hurting anyone, but you know, it can come across weird to people, whatever. This is a vamp friendly channel, a curious friendly channel, and I mean, if you guys want to come over and, you know, say hi or whatever, if you think, you know, if you're a dragon trapped in a human's body or whatever, I mean, I'm not pointing sticks, I'm not going, look at this, like, you know, I'm not doing that. It's completely mutual ground. Everybody in a decent community is welcome, you know. Just everyone try and be friendly is what I'm trying to say. Okay, anyway, like I said, I'll attempt to timestamp it, so, you know, people that aren't into that for whatever reason, like, I get it, like, you know, it's different than what you're used to, and a lot of people don't like different, because you see people running around in these, like, masks and tails and things, and you're like, I don't know, but like I said, whatever makes them happy. Okay, moving on for real. But yeah, back to the originally scheduled Vampirism program, rant and tangent over. I had a bunch of doubt periods, which I don't want to, like, gatekeep or anything, but in my opinion, I feel like that's how you know you're a genuine vampire. Have a lot of doubt periods. You will question what you are. You won't accept it straight away. You'll be like, no, surely not. This has to be some underlying condition, like some underlying health condition. And then you go and get yourself checked, and it turns out that, well, sometimes it turns out that, like, you're completely healthy, and for some unknown reason you have this energy deficiency or whatever you want to call it, and you don't necessarily need it to stay alive. You don't need, like, blood or energy, and you will, like, die and turn into dust like in the movies. But when you have it, it does make you feel better, and it heals your energy system, because for whatever reason, like I have explained several times, for some reason your body can't produce that thing that it needs very well by itself. I'm not just someone who has, like, vampiric traits, because you don't have to be a vampire to do psychic vampirism and stuff. If you have a weak energy body for whatever reason that isn't related to vampirism, you can still practice vampirism. If it's beneficial to you, you don't have to be, I mean, you can go out in the sun, but you don't have to have your eyes feel like they're boiling in your skull because of the sun. You don't have to, and have to wear sunglasses, otherwise your eyes will stream out and things like that. That could be underlying health conditions. It's not necessarily just a vampirism thing. Like I said, if your energy body is weak in any way and it's not related to vampirism in any way, you can still practice it. That's completely fine. I just wanted to mention that before anyone asks, like, oh, can you do that? Yes, you can. And I'm gonna go on now, and this might sound a little weird to some people, but I want to go on about it anyway because I found it fascinating. I don't really know how to explain this, because usually latent vampires, if they can, they'll find another vampire and they'll eventually awaken into that process because of the exposure to the other vampire, as I've explained before. But as I'm sort of in the wrong country and area for that, and there isn't, as far as I know, any around me that I can sense, my mind essentially came up with what I like to call a dream egregore that helped me through that awakening process. Basically, because there was no vampires around, my brain went, let's make one, and let's have it be a mentor in a lucid dream. Go into too much detail about the dream and like the setting and all that thing, because I might do that in a future video if anyone's like interested in this. But what I will say is, when people say about like the awakening, I just want to quickly detail. When people say about the awakening, people think it's like this sudden thing that suddenly happens. Not necessarily. I don't know how to explain it really. I'm going back to the water analogies because I mentioned like the sea otter earlier, but I'm going to go back to a water analogy really quick to explain like the awakening a bit better to some people that don't necessarily understand it very well. But imagine your mind is the ocean, and you've got all these. The ocean is relatively calm, and then you find out about this thing that you're eventually going to awaken to, and there's waves on this ocean now in your mind. Like in the ocean in your mind, there's little, playful waves. They kind of like skip around the sand, and there's like cute little animals, and they're enjoying it, and you're enjoying the waves in your brain, in your mind. I know this sounds really weird, but. And then eventually these waves, as you do research, will get sort of like bigger and rougher and more aggressive. Waves will come along because you're starting to learn more about your true self in a sense. And then eventually one day that knowledge will get to a point and there will be some sort of external thing that happens, and all of a sudden there'll be this big tidal wave, like the ones you surf on in Australia, like this massive tidal wave of, oh, that makes sense. And that's basically how the awakening works. There's little mini ripples, and then there's the big thing. But you've got to get to that point first. Yeah, basically this dream mentor helped with that a little bit. I was on the little ripply waves, and I was getting to the bigger waves. I'm not going to say it was my full awakening, because I still didn't go through that until a lot later, when I met my loyal minion / significant other, who isn't a vampire, but he is a rather supportive, as we like to call them, like vampire supporters, black swan. I don't want to sound soppy, but, I couldn't ask for someone more supportive. Well, I could, but, Anyway, stop over. Mentor and my loyal minion. It's an endearing term. I don't mean it as in like, when someone sarcastically calls you darling in an endearing but like, sort of sassy way. Same sort of thing in this regard. I don't call him loyal minion in real life. The funny in-character thing for Sang Average, so, I call him by his name and, other sort of endearing terms I won't put here because I don't want this video to turn, like, extremely sappy. This isn't a dating advice video. But yeah, long story short, dream mentor and significant other helped with my awakening as well. Eventually came into a true awakening. I do have a video on awakenings and the beacon and things like that. Again, shameless promotion, but if you haven't watched it, maybe go over, and if this video interests you, maybe go over to that one. It's a lot shorter than this one. This one kind of went on for a bit because I kind of tangented. But basically, where I am then versus now sort of thing, to summarise, basically used to start off as a little Wiccan baby witch with a little vanity and like a dragon skull to burn incense in and nothing else really, to like full on demonolatry. That's another thing I did. I did demonolatry for a little bit. I worked with Leviathan. That's where the sea serpents come back in. I worked with Leviathan for a bit, and I still do demonolatry in a sense, but. And again, I might mention this in the future video rather than here. If you've watched my Adventures in Yorkshire video, you will sort of understand where this is going. But I have been nudged several times by Lilith in her direction, so I'm doing eclectic vampire craft and also apparently starting you know, to work with Lilith, because she wants to work with me for some reason. So, you know, yeah, that's basically where I am now versus where I was back then. And that's, you know, everything I really wanted to say. So I'm going to try and, yeah, like I said, I'm going to stop this video now because I've said everything I want to. You know, give it a like or whatever if you enjoyed it and all that, and I'll see you in a future video.